My family fired me after my wife died. So I took everything from them without saying a word, and then When the man who gave you your name uses your wife's death to justify your firing, something inside you doesn't just break, it burns. That line came from my father's mouth without hesitation, like he was discussing freight volume or quarterly losses, not the woman I had spent 6 years loving more than anyone in this world. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. I just stood there in that stale, air-conditioned boardroom as the blood drained from my face, my lungs too tight to pull in a full breath. That was the moment I understood something I should have learned a long time ago. Sharing DNA doesn't mean they'll stand beside you when the world falls apart. Sometimes it means they'll help tip it over. My name's Caleb. I'm 35, and until 6 weeks ago, I was the chief operating officer of Reynard Transport, a company I spent 11 years helping build. I wasn't just an executive on a payroll. I was the one who transformed a glorified delivery service in Kansas City into a competitive logistics chain with regional clout. I spent birthdays in airports and anniversaries in conference calls. I missed holidays to chase contracts. And I did all of it because I believed in the myth my father fed me every single day. This company is family, and family comes first. That lie kept me working 80-hour weeks for most of my 30s. That lie helped me ignore every red flag. And that lie is what shattered the moment my wife, Nina, collapsed in our kitchen one March morning. She was 33. She was making blueberry pancakes. One minute she was laughing, and the next, she was on the floor, barely breathing. The ER doctor didn't sugarcoat anything. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. 6 months, maybe. We didn't get 6 months. We got just under 4. And every one of those days felt like holding a handful of sand while the wind ripped through our house, carrying her away piece by piece. I stopped going into the office. I started staying home. I didn't ask for time off, I told them. And when my father grunted his approval, I thought, maybe, just maybe, he meant it. But he never visited. Neither did my brother, Zeke. Not once. Not a text. Not a call. Nina noticed, of course. She didn't say it, but I saw it in her eyes, how that silence hurt more than the chemo. The day she died, she was still holding my hand, whispering with cracked lips that I should live well and find joy again. She made me promise. 3 days later, we held her funeral. Her parents came. Her college roommates came. Even her old manager drove in from St. Louis. My mother showed up for 10 minutes, kissed my cheek, and left without saying a word about the 2 people who mattered most to this story, Malcolm and Zeke. They're busy, she whispered. Something about a freight bidding war. Busy. My wife's death was a scheduling conflict to them. I went back to the office after a week, not because I was ready, but because I couldn't sit in that quiet house anymore. As I walked through the open plan floor, the people I'd hired, trained, mentored, they all paused. Some nodded. One squeezed my shoulder. A few just looked down, unsure of what to say. But their silence was kinder than what was waiting upstairs. At 10:03, the call came. Come to the 6th floor conference room, my father said, like he was ordering lunch. No condolences. No questions. No acknowledgement that my life had just been cracked in half. I stepped into the room. Malcolm at the head of the table, Zeke at his side, playing with a pen like a bored teenager. No one said hello. No one offered me a seat. You're done here, my father said. Flipping through a file like this was a routine HR exit. We're reclaiming your shares. I thought I'd misheard him. I asked why. He didn't blink. You took a week off. We lost a $170,000 rail contract. I reminded him it was approved. That Zeke was supposed to oversee things. Zeke scoffed, said, "Own your failures, man." Then Malcolm looked me dead in the eyes and said it. If your wife hadn't died, we'd have that contract. That's the truth. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched as years of sacrifice were wiped off the ledger with a single, callous sentence. I opened my mouth and asked him what the hell he just said, but he was already turning his chair toward the window. I placed both hands on the table and leaned in. She died in pain, and you weren't there. Not once. Not even when I begged you to visit. And now you have the audacity to make her death your excuse. Before the last word left my mouth, Malcolm slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "Enough. Get the hell out." So I did. I ripped off my badge, the same one he handed me when I got promoted, and left it on the table between us like a final warning shot. Then I turned, walked out of that building, and knew, for the first time in my life, I didn't have a father anymore. I had an enemy. I didn't say a word to anyone as I left that glass and steel tomb of a building, just carried the box of my belongings to the parking lot like it weighed 100 pounds instead of 10. Every step felt like it echoed through a part of my life I couldn't go back to. A chapter slammed shut not with a period, but with a knife in the back. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel while my pulse crawled back from the edge. That office had been my whole world for over a decade, and now I couldn't picture setting foot in it ever again. When I got home, I didn't unpack. I didn't take off my shoes. I sat in the dark with the framed photo of Nina and me, her smile frozen mid-laugh as if mocking the silence that filled the house now. I kept playing Malcolm's voiceover in my head. Cold, surgical, cruel. If your wife hadn't died, we'd still have the contract. The kind of sentence that infects your memory like poison. Not once had he asked how I'd been holding up. Not once had he mentioned her name until it was a scapegoat. The next day, I tried to pretend things were normal. I got up at 6, made coffee, shaved, even ironed a shirt before realizing I had nowhere to go. I was about to sit down and go through job listings when my phone buzzed. An old colleague, Lincoln, texting. Check your email. You need to see this. Inside was the forwarded internal memo from Malcolm, sent to the entire team without hesitation. Effective immediately, Caleb Reynard has been relieved of duties due to performance failures resulting in substantial financial losses. Performance failures. That's what they were calling 4 months of sleeping beside a hospital bed and watching your spouse fade away like steam on a mirror. I stared at the screen, stunned, until a second message came through. This one was angrier. They're blaming you for losing Westmount's rail account. Everyone knows Zeke screwed it up. Everyone. An hour later, Lincoln showed up at my front door with a to-go coffee and a look of someone who didn't know how to express what he really wanted to say. He handed me the drink without speaking and sat down across from me like we'd done 100 times in the office during all-nighters. They're rewriting the story, he finally said. Turning you into the villain so they don't have to explain how Zeke fumbled the logistics rollout. I didn't ask why he was telling me all this. I could see it on his face. He'd been thinking of leaving for a long time. Now he had a reason. Before he left that afternoon, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you ever build something again, anything, I'll follow." Then he walked out, leaving behind a business card with his personal number scribbled on the back. By the end of that week, 3 more of my old team had messaged me. Quiet, simple texts like, "You got screwed," or "Whatever your next move is, I want in." That should have felt good. Should have felt like validation. Instead, it felt like trying to stop a bleeding wound with an apology. I knew loyalty when I saw it, and I knew betrayal even better now. Still, none of it compared to the moment I heard the doorbell ring one evening and opened it to find my mother standing on the porch. Her hair was a mess, her eyes rimmed with red, like she'd spent hours trying to convince herself she still had some power left to change the inevitable. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. "I just came to talk," she said, pushing past me into the living room. I didn't stop her. I didn't want to fight, but I also didn't want to hear what I already knew was coming. She tried to start with small talk, but I cut through it. "Why are you here, Mom?" She looked down at her hands, clenched them like she was holding onto the last threads of her pride, and whispered, "Your father's not himself right now. He's under pressure. He regrets how it happened." I couldn't stop the laugh that ripped out of me. Regrets firing me, or regrets losing the rail contract. She didn't answer. She just stared at the picture of Nina on the bookshelf. "I miss her," she said, barely audible. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded once. "You had your chance to be there. You chose not to." She stood and walked to the door, but just before leaving, she turned back to me and said something that froze me in place. "He's scared, Caleb. The company's unraveling. Clients are walking. Zeke's overwhelmed. They need you." I didn't say a word as she left. I just stared at the now empty doorway and let the silence soak through me like rainwater into old wood. That night, I wrote down a name I hadn't thought about in years, Martin. a former rival, founder of Ironhold Freight. We'd competed fiercely years ago, but he'd always respected the work I put in. 2 days later, I opened my email to find a single line waiting for me. Call me. I've been hearing things. No subject. No fluff. Just opportunity wearing the mask of timing. I picked up the phone and called. The line only rang twice. Caleb, Martin said, like he'd been waiting. Let's talk. And just like that, the wind shifted. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was finally taking a breath. I met Martin at a quiet steakhouse tucked between two banks in downtown Omaha, the kind of place where nothing is written down and deals are made with handshakes over bourbon. He was already seated when I arrived, a drink in hand, his posture relaxed but eyes sharp, always calculating, always 10 steps ahead. We didn't dive straight into business. Instead, he asked about Nina, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to know. That alone told me everything I needed to remember about who he was. After dinner, and a few meaningless stories about outdated regulations and supplier delays, he set down his glass and said what I already suspected was coming. I want you at Ironhold. Chief Operating Officer, full authority over operations, and yes, you can bring your people. I didn't flinch, didn't show how fast my mind started racing, but inside something shifted like steel locking into place. And if I say no? I asked, testing him. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then I make sure none of the top 5 players touch you for the next 2 years. It wasn't a threat. It was leverage. It was a warning from a man who respected the game too much to let his pieces wander off the board uncontrolled. But he misread me if he thought I needed 3 days to consider. I leaned forward, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Have the contract on your desk by 8 a.m. I'll be there with my signature and 3 people who built that company while my family slept." His smile returned then, broader, cleaner, like a man watching a winning bet hit the table. We finished dessert in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled when both parties already know what comes next. By the next morning, I walked into Ironhold's headquarters, sleek black marble, chrome trim, a lobby that screamed quiet efficiency and unshakable control. Martin was waiting near the elevators, holding 2 coffees. "I hope you still take it black," he said. I did, and we went straight up to the top floor where a private conference room had been set aside. On the table sat a thick contract, a fresh pen beside it, and a list of benefits that dwarfed anything Reynard Transport had ever offered in my 11 years there. I read it once, scanned it again, and then signed with steady hands. It took less than 10 minutes to rewrite my future and burn the bridge behind me without so much as glancing back at the flames. The real surprise came 3 hours later when my phone started vibrating nonstop. Texts, emails, voicemails, one after another like someone had pulled a pin on a grenade back at Reynard. Word had spread fast. By the time I stepped out of my onboarding briefing, I had over 30 messages, all with the same underlying message. "If you're building something again, I want in." Most were names I'd worked shoulder to shoulder with for years, some I hadn't heard from in months. But every message felt like a small piece of validation fitting neatly into place. That same afternoon, I sat across from Martin again and handed him a list. "These are the people I trust," I said plainly. "These are the ones who walked through fire with me." He took one look and nodded. "These names, this is the backbone of the old operation." I didn't smile. There wasn't anything to celebrate yet. We hadn't won anything. Not yet. But we were about to start playing. The next 72 hours were a blur of meetings, briefings, onboarding sessions, and internal interviews. We didn't bother with long hiring processes or aptitude tests. I sat each one of them down. Lincoln, Ava, Nolan, Brian, and 6 others, and asked the only question that mattered. "Do you still trust me enough to follow me again?" Every one of them looked me in the eye and said yes without hesitation. That was all I needed. We weren't starting from scratch. We were rebuilding from scorched earth, and sometimes that's the best foundation there is, because the people who rise from fire don't flinch at heat. Within the first 2 weeks, Ironhold's internal performance systems saw their sharpest uptick in a decade. Projects moved faster. Client outreach went smoother, and existing partners noticed immediately. Then something strange started happening. Clients I'd once managed at Reynard began reaching out. Discreetly at first, cautiously, then openly. These were people I'd helped navigate stormy projects, solve shipping nightmares, secure hard-to-lock distribution deals. They didn't want to talk to Malcolm. They didn't want to talk to Zeke. They wanted me. And when they learned I was no longer part of the Reynard machine, they pulled out. One by one. Some moved their contracts over to Ironhold before I even had time to ask. Within a month, 7 of Reynard's 10 highest-grossing clients had left. 3 joined us outright. 2 suspended contracts indefinitely. The rest stopped returning calls. I didn't cheer. I didn't pour drinks. I simply moved forward, because the truth is, nothing humbles a man more than realizing the empire he helped build only stood tall because he was the one holding it up. It didn't take long for Malcolm to notice. The missed quarterly goals, the collapsing partnerships, the boardroom whispers, and eventually, the desperation. At first, I ignored the calls, voicemails from unlisted numbers, vague texts from numbers I half recognized, like ghosts trying to claw their way back into relevance. Then one night, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since that boardroom disaster. Malcolm. I let it ring out. A second call came. I answered. He didn't waste time. The company's struggling. We want you back. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a plea hidden behind a failed negotiation tactic. We'll offer you 30% more than Ironhold. Your shares will be reinstated. You'll have full control. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline as the city lights blinked softly in the night. Do you remember what you said to me that day? I asked. The line went quiet. Not a sound. Not a sigh. Not even a breath. Because he remembered. And that silence was louder than any answer he could have given me. I didn't hang up. I let him sit in it. Let him taste the emptiness he had carved out with his own hands. When he finally spoke again, I ended the call without a word. I thought the phone call from Malcolm would be the last chapter in our long, messy story, but I underestimated just how far desperation could drag a man once full of pride and certainty. The morning after his hollow offer, I was still halfway through my coffee when the doorbell rang. Sharp, repetitive, and with the kind of urgency you can't fake. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw a figure I hadn't looked in the eye since the day she brushed past me at Nina's funeral without a word of comfort. My mother stood there on the front step, clutching her coat tight around her shoulders as if the autumn air might swallow her whole. Her eyes were puffy, lips trembling, hands barely steady enough to grip the fabric near her chest. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside like muscle memory, still convinced this house belonged to her son. I didn't stop her. I didn't say anything. I let her sit on the edge of the couch, eyes roaming the room as if trying to remember what kind of man I had become without their influence. He didn't mean what he said, she began, voice barely above a whisper. Your father, he was angry, under pressure. Things were falling apart, and he snapped. I stood across the room, arms crossed, unmoved. I'd waited months for an apology, but now that one had finally arrived, it was so diluted, so sanitized by excuses and blame shifting that it only made me colder. She kept going, words tumbling out faster now, her desperation becoming harder to hide. Zeke's struggling, she said. The board's in chaos. Clients are pulling out. We didn't think it would get this bad, but we need you back. We're ready to fix things. I looked at her and saw not a mother reaching out to mend a broken family, but a woman sent ahead like a scout on a battlefield, hoping to find some crack in the enemy's resolve. I let the silence settle for a moment, then slowly shook my head. No, you need me to carry what you can't, I said, my voice steady. You want me to be the foundation again, but this time you're only asking because everything you tried without me collapsed. She stood, eyes wide with tears, hands reaching out like that gesture alone could make the last year disappear. We're family, she said, as if that word still held any weight in this house. I stepped back toward the door, opened it slowly, and motioned for her to leave. Family wouldn't have blamed Nina for my absence, I said quietly. Family wouldn't have let her die without even saying goodbye. The moment the door shut behind her, I locked it and leaned against it, my breath slow and deep. There was no anger left, only a heavy kind of peace, the kind that comes when you finally realize the only way forward is alone. But they didn't stop there. 1 week later, while reviewing quarterly reports at the office, I got a message from an old colleague who had once worked inside the Reynard accounting team. The message was short but sharp. Be careful. They're trying to lure you back to stabilize the company just long enough to offload the debt. Once the ship's floating again, they'll cut you loose a second time. I stared at those words for a long time. There wasn't a shred of doubt in my mind they were true. Malcolm didn't want a son. He wanted a tool, something to wield until it broke again. And Zeke? He wanted a shield to hide behind when the consequences of his incompetence finally caught up to him. That night, I filed paperwork for a restraining order. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. I sent copies to the company's legal team, to Malcolm's office, and directly to Zeke. The message was clear: don't step near me again. But clarity doesn't always come with closure. 2 weeks later, while I was sketching logistic strategies on my kitchen table, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find both Malcolm and Zeke standing on the porch. Gone were the designer jackets and smug grins. Malcolm looked older, sunken around the eyes, like the weight of collapse had finally found his bones. Zeke looked worse, disheveled, hollowed out by panic and embarrassment. They didn't say hello. They just stood there, shifting uncomfortably, and Malcolm finally broke the silence. You bought this house when you were with the company. We helped with the down payment. Technically, we have claim. I didn't answer, just stared. Then Zeke stepped forward, voice cracking slightly. We thought maybe you'd sell it back to us. Or loan us some of the equity. I blinked, genuinely stunned by the boldness of their request. When I didn't respond, Zeke added quickly, just enough to float a bridge loan. 50,000 would be enough to get us talking with investors again. Malcolm nodded. Just 50, Caleb. That's nothing to you now. I stepped out onto the porch, stood in front of them so close they couldn't escape the weight in my voice. You want my help? I asked. Malcolm opened his mouth to answer, but I raised a hand to silence him. Then here's what you'll do. You'll drive to the cemetery where Nina is buried. You'll kneel at her grave, and you'll beg for forgiveness for the way you used her death as leverage to clean up your own mess. If she forgives you, then maybe, just maybe, I will too. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and closed the door. Through the window, I saw them hesitate, then turn and walk away, their steps dragging like men walking out of a courtroom with a sentence still ringing in their ears. They didn't knock again. They didn't call. And I didn't feel the need to check the locks that night. At Ironhold, things were different. We had momentum now, real growth, and a core team that trusted each other like family never had. The business press was catching on. Articles mentioning the exodus from Reynard, the quiet surge at Ironhold, analysts wondering what magic we'd captured. But I knew it wasn't magic. It was loyalty, forged in fire and betrayal, refined in silence and resolve. Then one night, while I was nursing a drink on the balcony and watching headlights pass like fireflies below, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Malcolm. It wasn't Zeke. It was an unrecognized number, but something told me I already knew who it was. I answered, and sure enough, Zeke's voice exploded through the line, drunk on rage and disbelief. You did this. You ruined everything. You killed the company. I let him rant. Let the fury pour through the phone until he ran out of breath. Then, slowly, I lifted my glass, took a sip, and said, I didn't kill anything. I just stopped saving it. The silence that followed was delicious. I ended the call and turned off my phone, knowing that whatever came next wouldn't be a conversation. It would be an ending. Not loud, not explosive. The final time I saw Malcolm and Zeke in person came 3 weeks after that drunken phone call, long enough for their desperation to ferment into something sour and clumsy. I had just finished reviewing a new carrier integration report when the doorbell rang again, a dull series of knocks without rhythm, like someone too anxious to plan out their approach. I opened the door, expecting another delivery, but there they were, father and son, standing shoulder to shoulder like the broken pieces of a painting someone had tried to tape back together. They looked awful, not unkempt in a theatrical way, but worn down in that slow, grinding fashion only failure can cause. Malcolm's shirt wasn't tucked in. Zeke's shoes were mismatched. Neither of them could meet my eyes for more than 2 seconds at a time. "We need to talk," Malcolm started, his voice cracked and brittle. I didn't answer, just leaned against the doorframe and waited. "The bank froze our operating credit," he continued. "We're behind on lease payments. Staff's walking out. The company is going under." I still didn't say anything. There was nothing they could tell me that I hadn't already heard from old colleagues, suppliers, or quiet reports sent from inside. The company was hemorrhaging clients, burning through reserves, and scrambling to survive each week. It wasn't a business anymore. It was a countdown. Then Zeke jumped in. "We figured if you could just maybe help us close a round of funding, we could stabilize. Just until we bring on a turnaround firm. Or even a loan. Something short-term." His voice cracked halfway through, the words tumbling over each other in a mess of pride and panic. 50,000. That's all. It's pocket change for you now, right? I let out a breath, slow and steady, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wanted to feel how far I'd come from the man who once would have said yes without thinking. "You want money from me?" I asked quietly, almost curious. Malcolm opened his mouth, nodded, but I kept going before he could make another pitch. "You stood in a room and told me my wife's death was a business inconvenience. You blamed her pain for your failures. You erased everything she meant to me and used it as a shield for your own incompetence." Neither of them moved. They didn't deny it. Maybe they finally realized there was nothing left to defend. "You want my help?" I said, stepping forward. "Go to Nina's grave. Kneel. Apologize to her. Admit what you did. Admit what you said. And if you feel anything real in that moment, anything honest, maybe she'll forgive you. And maybe I'll consider doing the same." Their silence was deafening. Malcolm looked like he'd been slapped. Zeke just stared at the porch, avoiding my eyes. Without waiting for their answer, I stepped back and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it dramatically. I just closed it like a book that had finally reached its last page. I didn't hear from them again. And that was the real ending. Not with an explosion, but with silence. Ironhold thrived. We expanded into 3 more regions. Our tech integrations tripled efficiency margins. Our team became tighter, sharper, more loyal than anything I had known at Reynard. Clients stayed not because we begged, but because we delivered every damn time. And me? I started sleeping again. I stopped waking up to memories of that boardroom or that final breath in the hospital. But I never forgot Nina. I still visited her grave every Sunday morning. Sometimes I brought flowers, sometimes coffee, sometimes nothing but time. I'd sit there and talk about the week, what I was building, who I was becoming. It wasn't mourning, it was remembering. And remembering meant she never really left. If you're still reading, if you've made it this far with me, I want to say something I couldn't say to myself a year ago. Walking away doesn't make you weak. Cutting off blood doesn't make you cruel. Sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is admit that the people you trusted most are the ones holding you back. Sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. For a long time, I asked myself if I'd gone too far. Filing the restraining order. Turning them away when they begged. Refusing to give even $1 when I had more than enough to spare. But the answer came every time I remembered Nina lying in that hospital bed, smiling through pain, whispering that I should live and be free. She didn't ask me to carry guilt. She asked me to move forward. So I did. And if you're standing where I stood, at the edge of a decision that feels like it'll shatter everything, ask yourself one thing. Who stood beside you when your world burned? Who brought water? And who brought gasoline? Once you answer that, you'll know what to do. I don't know what comes next. I don't pretend to have it all figured out. But I do know this. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into places I've outgrown. I'm done bleeding just to keep someone else's image of family intact. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd still walk away. Without hesitation. Without looking back. If you like the story, subscribe to Thread Chronicles right away and listen to new stories every day. Let us know what you like the most in the comments. Write what you think about this and what could be done better. Turn on the notification ringer so you don't miss a single story.